Hi, Year 7. The aim of this experiment is to work out how to filter a mixture that's got a filtrate and a residue, so a soluble and an insoluble substance, where the insoluble substance is really, really fine. So what we're going to need is some coloured chalk and copper sulfate mixture that you will find on the bench, a conical flask, a beaker, funnel, filter paper, stirring rod, and definitely our safety glasses for this one. You'll be given a little powdered mixture, which is a mixture of the copper sulfate and the coloured chalk. So we're going to place the powdered mixture into a beaker. It's not liquid at the moment, but we're going to add 50 ml of water. What we're going to try and do there is to make sure that the copper sulfate dissolves and turns into a solution, whereas the coloured chalk is insoluble, so it will stay as a solid. We need to use a stirring rod to mix the water and the powder as best as we can so that we can get all the copper sulfate dissolved. What we're going to do is we're going to make like a sieve with our filter paper. This is our filter paper here, and there's a couple of ways for folding them, but this is probably the quickest and the most efficient that we need for this prac. So fold the filter paper as shown. So fold it in half, then fold it in half again, so you've got quarters. And then we open it into a little funnel. So you've got one paper width on one side, three filter paper widths on the other side. And all you need to do is tip the water powder mixture into the filter paper. And as you can see through this diagram, what should happen is the copper sulfate will slide through and the chalk, or we might even use sand tomorrow, will be left back. So it's just like filtering. We end up with pure sand, which will rinse through, and we end up with a copper sulfate solution. So remember, this is a mixture of copper sulfate and water. We're going to separate that in an extra prac. Make sure when you put this in that you don't stir inside the filter paper. Filter paper gets quite fragile when it's wet, so we don't want to rip it because then that would let this chalk or the sand go through and that would spoil our whole experiment. So we need to keep it safe. The other thing to remember is we are going to keep this solution of copper sulfate, so you should have a nice clear blue solution there, and we're going to separate the copper sulfate from the water again. This might be something you need to do in your assessment task. Don't forget to write up your experiment with your aim, your method, and your results. And the results contrast the size of the copper sulfate particles with that of the chalk. Contrast means explain what the difference is. So you might want to do a table, or you might be able to do this in just a sentence, and explain your observation. Remember, the filter paper is like paper with tiny, tiny little holes all through it. 2. Produce a magnified diagram explaining how the filtrate is trapped by the filter paper. Use different symbols for the solute and the solvent particles. And thirdly, recommend a method that might recover the copper sulfate paper from the filtrate, and we will have a go at that a bit later. Okay, I hope you've read this and gone through this before the prac. If you want to get started straight away, can you write a heading, filtration, in your science book and copy out the aim. Thanks, Year 7. We'll get on to this next lesson.